Or you can start off your statements with, as the only non-Gabriel on this panel. Do you like that one? Thank you. I love being witty.
Witty committee.
Are we meant to look somewhere? Or do we just look at each other?
I think we've got.
I'll be over here, so if you need a face to look at, you can look.
If you want to say something dramatic, you can look straight into a camera.
Yes, and if you want to make a really good point or make people really uncomfortable, depending on what your vibe is, look straight into the camera. Okay, here we go. We're cracking. It's going.
Cool.
Firstly, would any of you guys like a Dragon Granadilla Seltzer while you're speaking from our friends at Brooks?
Sure.
It's hard to maneuver.
Are you okay? Feel free to shout if and when you feel like some refreshment or another drink.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm going to wait for that motorcycle individual to leave us. Okay. Welcome, one and all. Thanks to those who are joining us in the audience. To the second edition of Yours Queerly, which is very, very exciting. And the topic, or the broad topic of today's conversation, is around masculinity. It's a very broad topic of conversation. It having been, Testicular Cancer Awareness Month. There's also been a lot of emphasis this month on men's mental health, which is something super important to be touching on. But we wanted to just start off by getting each of you to introduce yourselves. What is just for people watching, what is your name? What are your pronouns? How do you identify? And then we'll get into the other stuff, starting with you.
Hello, my name is Gabriel, and my pronouns are he, they.
Hi, my name is Mihlali Jia. My pronouns are he, they.
My name is also Gabriel, and my pronouns are he, him.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we're going to start off trying to get each individual's perspective on what masculinity means to you. It is a very broad experience, and we wanted to reflect the broadness of that experience in this conversation. So I'm going to flip the direction and just, start off by giving us an idea of right now what masculinity means to you.
Cool. So for me, masculinity is inherently at its core about performance. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that what it is a way that you express, but also identify. It's deliberately a vague term because it means a lot of different things depending on the context or depending on the individual. I think that there are two ways of looking at it. One of them is the societal approach. So that's looking at what society expects, the pressures, the expectations. That's also where performance kind of relates to where you're evaluated on that performance. So it's sort of how well are you performing masculinity as we expect it. The other is the personal aspect. So you've got this exo definition and then the endo definition, being that what is masculinity to you specifically. And to me, masculinity has been something I've struggled with in several different ways, but ultimately I've found some kind of solace in and some kind of comfort in that identity and being happy with the way that I see myself and express myself to the world. Sometimes a-traditionally and ignoring that societal definition, but still feeling it in myself.
Ditto.
Okay.
That was great.
Please continue.
Okay, my personal relationship with masculinity has been up and down because, as we've said, as Gabriel has said, it's just, in terms of a societal perspective, processing masculinity and trying to make it your own is difficult because of the certain expectations that are held there, the performance. You feel like you have to perform. Whereas what I've been trying to do is build a healthy relationship with my masculinity, seeing what it means for me. And also for me, because I'm quite a spiritual person, looking at masculine energy, feminine energy, I'm trying to channel my masculine energy in terms of it's logical, it's doing, you know, as whereas feminine energy is like more your being. And I'm trying to somehow reshape it for myself, but then that in my head always begs the question, okay, so what is masculinity? What's femininity? Am I trying to do a crossover episode here that's just not working out? Like, which one is which? Because I think it's hard trying to find that balance and keep both of them somewhat different at the same time. But yeah.
Those are both such nice answers. I just want to ditto all of it. But I think for me, I don't really know. I think masculinity is changing all the time for me. I think it's extremely subjective. I was trying to think about how I would define it, knowing that this talk was coming up, and I couldn't come to an answer. Yes, as Gabriel said, there is society's idea of masculinity. I'm a trans man, I'm on hormones, and that is specifically something that is quote-unquote masculinizing my body. But that means a different thing to what I believe my masculinity to be, and I think that it's also, as Mihlali said, such a spiritual thing and such an energetic thing, masculinity and femininity, that isn't necessarily... It's not, you can divorce it from gender completely. I believe that everyone has both energies and a multitude of other energies and mix-ups of both energies in them, and sometimes none. I think there are a million ways to be masculine, feminine, neither or both. So I find it too subjective to define, and as someone who has lived in the world as someone who's perceived as a woman, and as someone who's lived in the world as someone who's perceived as non-binary, and as someone who's perceived as a man, I feel like my masculinity hasn't changed in any of that. My physical appearance has changed, and other people's opinion of my masculinity has changed, but how I experience masculinity as basically like a naughty little boy who's now just a grown-up is unchanging and unmoving, you know?
Thank you all for I think really interesting answers, and we'll tap into different aspects of, you know, where we go with, I think, the performance aspect, the how you perform your masculinity. I think for most men, and we know this because of the, you know, huge mental health crisis for men in the world, there's so much anxiety around that performance, you know, performance of your masculinity, performance in general, societally. Are you, you know, meeting those largely now outdated stereotypes of who, you know, is the breadwinner or, you know, and even as conscious men who are conscious of the damage of those stereotypes, I think the fact that regardless of that, you deal with this immense anxiety around how to perform your masculinity. And I think that's something really important to get into. And also the fact that there's this huge variety of experiences of masculinity, and, you know, and we're kind of, you know, this is talking to the choir to a degree, but it's important to bring the conversation out around all of those different ways of expressing masculinity and them all being valid, and giving men the space to express themselves in, you know, beyond what is generally societally a very linear expectation. The next question I wanted to ask was, I think growing up as a boy into a man, or growing up with, you know, as someone who was identified culturally as a girl, and that growth into a man, I think growing into a man is a hugely stressful experience, and for so many different reasons. How has, and you kind of started touching on it, so I want to jump back in.
Sure.
You said your masculinity, you know, your masculinity hasn't changed over the years, but I want to kind of go into how you perceived masculinity, how you perceived your masculinity when you were prepubescent, or going through those, you know, pubescent stages, and coming to realize what does being a man really mean, whilst there's all of this societal pressure trying to tell you what that looks like. And I know you said it hasn't changed all that much, but, you know, the growth through it, and then for the other two, how your relationship with your masculinity has changed, kind of, I think, particularly through that pubescent period into becoming an adult, as it were.
Well, I'm really glad for me that you said pubescent stages, because I have kind of had two puberties. The one was from having very much kind of a boyhood before my first puberty, and then hitting puberty, and because of the way my body was changing, society around me and my family and friends telling me, oh, no, you're a girl, you're supposed to do these things, and you're supposed to, you know, you're growing boobs, therefore you must do this with them and whatever. And I think that was a bit of a shocker for me. I was like, wait, could no one have told me that sooner? Because I felt like such a boy. So I had a sense of what I guess now retroactively was masculinity feeling inside me in terms of, and this always feels so obscure when I try to explain it, but I've always felt as a kid like there was a guy narrating my life. And I was always like, it's so weird. I wonder if everyone else also has a dude in their head. And then now I kind of realized that was just me and my own inner voice in my head. And I always just thought that I was kind of like driving this vehicle that was a woman, or that was becoming a woman, but that there was a guy in my head, but that's actually me. It was kind of weird. So I went through that puberty, and my sense of masculinity in the sort of spiritual, energetic sense didn't really change, because I still just felt like a boy, except I felt more foreign in the body as it changed. And I didn't have the words for that at the time, but I do distinctly remember like feeling like, whoa, okay, I gotta drive. It's like getting into a shift car and you only drive automatic, and you're just like, okay, I guess this is what I've been dealt with. I'm gonna kind of try drive it as best I can, and maybe I can get really good at it. So I tried really hard to lean into my femininity in a way that would look like quote unquote woman. Then my second puberty, when I was 28 and I started hormone replacement therapy, or gender affirming hormone therapy, I went on testosterone, which I'm still on. And that was weird, because I then was experiencing what society and friends and family thought my masculinity should look like as I started to look like a man, whatever that is, as in my fat and muscle distribution changed, and I grew facial hair and all the things that society deems as, oh, that's a man thing, completely obscurely. And so as that was happening, I started to also experience socially what masculinity offers in terms of privilege. And yes, there are so many of those things that are privileges that are actually completely harmful to men as well. But there are first privileges before men, I guess, realize or experience the harms of them. So, for example, walking into a room and just having your opinion respected, or not being spoken over, or, your opinions at work being taken as, just at face value. That kind of stuff that I hadn't experienced as my life before had allowed, in terms of being perceived as a woman. That stuff made me start to go like, well, masculinity feels kind of dodge. Like, I feel like I'm getting a free pass in a lot of ways, and there are just so many things that came with it that I then started to question it all the time. And so my logical perception of masculinity shifted, while my sort of inherent energetic kind of spiritual experience of it didn't. I did have a very different experience in the world, and how I navigate the world and how I'm received in the world. And that, I guess, that experience of masculinity changed my mind about the world every 2 seconds. Like, it was really strange and constantly shifting.
McLally?
I'm just processing. Well, if we're talking about pubescent stages, I went to an all-boys school.
Shame.
Blessings.
My condolences.
It's okay. I was actually at an all-boys school from like grade 3 until matric. But anyways, so it was just interesting to see how even schools like have a specific mold for masculinity. We were on camp, very traumatic. We were on camp, grade 10 camp, and we're just like trekking through the wild and whatever. There was one night, the whole thing was like grit and gratitude. That was the whole like slogan for that whole camp, grit and gratitude. we don't know what grit is till this day. We stood in the rain. It was a thunderstorm. We had to find cover somewhere. I don't know. Some people stayed. They gave us the option of going home. I remember one of the teachers came in our backyard and was like looking at us. We were standing in the cold, shivering, begging to leave. He was like, "Grit, boys, grit." I said, "Excuse me, I'm gonna be sick. My parents don't know I'm standing in the rain. There's lightning." But like that, just those experiences kind of show you how stupid it can be sometimes. Like, we don't actually know what this masculinity thing is. We're just like, okay, breadwinner, strength, mean,
Suffering.
Like, literally, it's just like, how are any of you happy with this, you know? But it's very interesting to see, because also from my background, I think also traditionally, like with age, more of my manliness has to come. Like as a young child, you can do whatever you need to do. You can have fun. Then when you get to 13, you're starting to change or whatever. Like your body's changing. You're starting to become a man now. Then matriculating, you're going out to the real world and a man again. 21, a man again. You know, it's like all these stages of just becoming manlier and manlier. It's just like, you can see how that, I think for me, masculinity just started to become way more limiting in the person I could be, the goals I wanted, how I could express myself, because it's like the endless possibilities just started narrowing to one lane that I had to follow through. And it's like, whatever happened to having fun or just being a child, you know, like it kind of dims your light as you have to be this man that's a provider. And I've seen how it's affected a lot of the men around me, the men in my life, and just how they value themselves. It's so sad to see. You only see yourself as an alpha, and if you're not an alpha, you don't provide anything. I know it's like, it's silly to say, but like genuinely there are people that believe this in terms of, if you're not heading a house, if you're not providing in this way, you are worthless. And as you're saying, it's a privilege first in terms of this, but it's so detrimental. Because when you don't have those things, that's when you start to see men being angry. You know, a man that's not earning becomes so sour and bitter. I'm just like, you know, you can be loved because you're just a person. You are able to feel that. You're able to rest. You can take breaks. Because I can say, especially during COVID, I've seen how a lot of households and whatever, people are being let go of their jobs. You know, fathers, mothers, but I'm just saying, you can see the way it affects the way fathers also value themselves, because like, if I'm not providing, I'm useless. I'm like, what about the lessons? What about the fact that I'm quite literally made up from your DNA too? Like, whatever happened to the bond we had, you know? And it's sad to see, but that's also had to make me relook and navigate this masculinity that I'm being put into, because I'll be damned before I see myself as anything but a human being before anything else, you know? Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And there's a few things that I want to loop back on as further touch points. But before we get there, Gabriel, if you want to.
So there are 2 points that Gabe and Michali kind of brought up, and I want to see if I can remember them as I'm speaking. So firstly, Gabe kind of alluded to something. There's this poet, academic called Alok Menon. And anyone who is following anything in any gender sphere knows who Alok Menon is. And they spoke about how trans and non-binary people need to be or are inherently at the forefront of any gender liberation movement, because they are the ones who are dissecting, hang on, what is this gender thing and where does it come from? Another point that they make is about how like masculinity and femininity, they liken them to like the stars in the night sky, that there are 2 really bright stars, but there are tons of other stars. And that's sort of what Gabe was talking about when he has this perspective of, hang on, what did it actually mean to be a man? What makes not a man? So that dissection, which then ties into something Michali mentioned, which is, hang on, so masculinity is this all-pervading set of instructions that society gives. Where do those instructions even come from? What is this force that is governing us so strictly, and how is it so difficult to break out of? So in my upbringing, so I come from a very, very accepting family. I did not go to an all-boys school, thank God. And I went to very accepting schools as well, which should have allowed me to have some sense of like expression and being able to like do whatever I want to do. And so I'm gay, and I've known that for a really long time. And that's where my struggle with masculinity came from, in that like how much of like what I'm expressing like is fitting a perception of what I was expected to be. Am I too feminine, especially in any artistic pursuits that I had or anything like that? And my family and school were extremely accepting of any kind of slight deviance from masculinity that I had. I am not immune to peer pressure. I just am not.
What?
And for some reason, I still, despite the support that I had, always found myself questioning or holding back, or whenever I did something that didn't make me a man, I felt resistance. I felt like I'm not living up. I'm disappointing people in doing that. So it brings back those points. Why is there a force that governs us, and where does that force come from? Yeah.
Colonialism. The colonial structures, I think, is
Yeah,
maybe part of the answer.
That's
White people.
generally, yeah. Often it tends to be. Hey,
Real.
I think there were so many important things highlighted through that, and I want to kind of tie some threads. I think one thing I want to go into is this experience and almost expectation, both societally and internally, to eat suffering as a man, whether that's in your job, in your relationship, in what you do for other people, in terms of just being expected to be the one who can just eat it. And kind of tying into Gabriel's, we went to the same school, and again, you know, as an environment, it was a co-ed school. It was very generally progressive, and you know, there was a lot of acceptance around a lot of different expressions of masculinity, femininity. It wasn't really something people really bothered with. And then, you know, I as well went through co-ed schools I am a cis-het, as me and Gina say, so far straight, white man. You know, I sit with all of the best of those privileges. And having gone to schools that were progressive and liberal, I had female friends throughout my childhood. In fact, up until I got to school, almost all of my friends were girls. So I was very in touch with my femininity and the feminine energy, and confident in that, with a family who, you know, and I'm going into detail to express the depth of it, you know, a mother and a father who always encouraged me to cry and that it was okay, you know, like, to parents who gave space for that, a school that gave space for that, everything, partners who have made space for that. And despite all of that, and all of the comfort around that, I think, as you kind of all alluded to, the constant anxiety around, am I doing it right? Am I performing my duties? Am I doing enough? Am I earning my value? Am I doing enough to be loved? You know, am I worthy as a man if I don't do X and Y and Z of love? And I think that goes back to the mental health crisis that faces men all over the world around, you know, there's this societal and internal expectation to just eat the suffering and sit with it. And we don't have spaces. And even for the men who do have those spaces and are in communities that are supportive of that, how deeply ingrained that kind of the instruction, you know, to just sit with it. And, you know, you can be brought up by parents who say boys do cry, and you can have the best supportive environment in the world. And that propaganda, which I affirm, you know, colonial Western propaganda around what that looks like, is so deeply ingrained that someone like me who has the best chance of escaping that is still constant, and I'm surrounded by, you know, powerful men and confident men who continually inspire me to progress in that, but how really incredibly hard it is to break that, and why we have a scourge of suicide amongst men. And I think that's something we really need to, and if there was an easy answer, we would have all, we wouldn't be sitting here having the conversation. But I want to go into, where do I want to move from here? Oh yes, that's actually a good idea. Would anyone in the audience like to throw in a question or a comment on masculinity? Because as we've discussed, everyone has both and elements of both, and it's important to involve women and non-binary people and everyone in the conversation. So if anyone has something they'd like to add in that they picked up on that maybe we haven't, now is an opportunity. There will be other opportunities. If not,
Don't be
super
shy.
chilled.
The camera isn't on you. It's okay.
Yes, you can definitely say something. I'm going to hold this mic for you.
Thank you.
Hi, panel.
Hey.
Okay, so for me, like being on the outside, being a heterosexual black woman, one thing I've noticed about the queer community is it's too high. Okay. Yeah, like one thing I've noticed about like the queer community is like there's more like an emphasis to kind of like shun away masculinity and take on more feminine traits. But I feel like having both masculine and feminine traits can be really quite liberating to everyone, actually. So I think we should start to think about like positive masculinity and, embodying that with feminine traits, and just, I think that could be your highest self, honestly, not like the polar opposite. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you say that in the queer community, people tend to shun masculine traits in favor of feminine traits. In some ways, I've found a lot of the opposite in that. Masculinity is prized still in society, and I'm sure both of you have had this experience in some ways, that you notice in the queer community, especially gay men, because we are so problematic. We are so problematic. There's this a prize of masculinity and being more masculine.
Yeah, you still see on Grindr all the time. I still see bios that say no femmes. And then I go like, can you not see your own internalized homophobia and your misogyny in saying something like that? But I do also get where you're coming from. So I have an answer, but sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just...
Yeah, I think exactly as you said, Gabriel. It's so. My answer would be different if you asked me that question or made that comment in terms of the lesbian community, in terms of the gay community, in terms of the overall queer community, the trans community. There are so many different ways I think that I would answer that, but I think, as Gabriel said, in the gay community specifically, yes, we see a lot of femininity because that is what shouts, "Hey, I'm gay." You see, Drag Race, or you see queers on the street, gay guys on the streets, or gay guys on the streets, or they thems on the street, non-binary people on the streets who would identify as gay or be in the gay world, and that femininity seems loud and there seems to be more of it, I think, because maybe we see it as a statement, whereas there is a massive amount of masculinity in the gay community, some of which is beautiful and I love it, but some of it is also really toxic and really misogynist and really, I hope I don't get dragged for it, but I would say of all the communities I have gone in and out of in my journey of figuring out who I am, and I'm basically been L, G, B, and T so far, that is the community where I find the most misogyny. Not to say it doesn't exist elsewhere. It's there in the lesbian community as well, and I know I'm just saying things that people might hate me for, but I do think it exists everywhere, and that's not any specific community or person's fault. It is a structural problem. I think it is because generally our world, our Western society really celebrates masculinity, as Gabriel said.
Yeah.
And so if you are other than masculine, then that is loud, and so that is noticed more. but it is not necessarily celebrated more. But I do also completely agree with your point that finding a positive masculinity and finding ways to celebrate that without giving men more space. It's not about space, because God knows men do not need to take up more space, but that positive masculinity in the sense that it's not toxic masculinity, and that kind of toxic masculinity, as we said, all of us have touched on, that starts as privilege but also is detrimental to the men themselves, and is actually detrimental most of the time to women and femmes in the world. We really do need to find positive masculinity, because we can't just continue with toxic masculinity. It's going to be a tragedy for everyone.
Yeah, and that's actually segued beautifully, I think. Do you want to do a...
I was reading something about queer masculinities for the straight man, and speaking about how this paper defined queer masculinity as any performance of masculinity that fit outside of like the heteronormative, stereotypical masculinities. And I think, like, I understand your points, and I see where you're coming from, and I think it would be so beautiful if men that are heteronormative or whatever, like, embrace what they so-called like the queer masculinity, because it's them being masculine, but I think it's allowing, I don't know, your truest self. Yeah. I don't know my words are, but I'm not heading this today because I've lost English and brain power, but I hope that was understandable.
I'll follow on that and then lead into a question. I think the queer masculinities conversation is also a really interesting one, and you mentioned that the femininity, particularly amongst gay men, often acts as a marker or like a way of expressing, the difference. And the queer masculinities that Gina was reading about, I think we know a huge part of the problem is just men feel so hugely limited in their expression and their ability to deviate in any way from what those, heteronormative masculinities look like. And there is so much, like, I love sometimes we'll go out or we'll have an event here or something, and generally I don't do it too much myself just because the time doesn't whatever for me, but Gina will sometimes do my eyes or do some glitter on my eyes or whatever, and I love it, and it makes me feel really, really good. And luckily we have we surround ourselves generally with people who don't have a problem with that. But as I've been able to feel more comfortable, I think, with a partner and with communities and spaces where I can do that, I've felt so much more confident and able to talk about so much more than just, that little thing. And I think I'd really like to go into, the positives around masculinity and those quote unquote queer masculinities and ways of expression that do extend beyond, because I think so many of the most incredible, beautiful men that I have met or, are not normative, and even the ones who look hyper masculine, whatever that means, or conform to a very standard expectation of what a man should look like or present like, where there is the ability for them to express themselves in a real way, in a different way. I think there's so much, and I think there's so much strength and power in those men, and it's you can see it from across the room, but we need to find ways for more men to feel like they can do that. So getting into the positives of masculinity, because we live in a world where there's a huge conversation around toxic masculinity, and rightfully so. It's fucked up pretty much everything. But within that, I think and it's one of the things that's fueling this mental health crisis, is so many men who were brought up by often a generation of men who went to war or, were subjected to the very worst of what the very, completely soul-destroying expectations on men. And I mean, South African men, a lot of people's fathers went to war, to the border, or were involved in protest action that was alike to war. And those were men who were never given any way to express themselves and pass that down to their children. We can't remove toxic masculinity without having something that fills that void and a way for men to go, okay, cool, I'm not doing this because this is bad. Here's how I can express myself positively. And I think without that, what we're seeing is a huge crisis of identity. And I was never taught any other masculinity other than toxic masculinity. And for a lot of men who are not surrounded by people, I think most of us are, at least engaged in communities where there is space for that. There's no alternative that people have been taught, and people aren't living in societies where there is a viable alternative. And I think we need to, as much as we criticize and deal with the issues around toxic masculinity, we have to be complementing that conversation around how men can find positivity and pride and comfort in their masculinity, whatever that looks like. So, yeah, I mean, thoughts on positive masculinity and the positives of masculinity that you see?
No,
okay.
talk. Please talk.
Positive masculinity. Whenever I hear that, it just feels weird. Is what positive?
What is that?
Is that a spice?
And
Is it a
therein
sauce?
lies the problem.
But
Is that a
I
spice?
think there definitely are positive aspects of masculinity. As I was speaking about these energies in a spiritual sense, is that it's very driving, like forward driving, like it. Sometimes masculinity is good to a certain point, then it's overdone. Like, let's say you're stuck in your feelings, and now my feminine energy wants to just take care of myself, lounge around, rest, which is good, but life needs to get going, and someone needs to say, like, hey, let's keep it moving. Hade, it is what it is. Like, that's nice up to a certain point until you start, like, almost like gaslighting yourself and not taking care of yourself. It's like, these environments we've created, there needs to, I think positive masculinity, first of all, will not exist without having to look into your femininity, Like, we have to be able to, first of all, even speak to each other, Like, there's so many times when, let's say Saturdays are for the boys. Every Saturday you're drinking. No one's actually saying, how are you? How was your day? How's life actually been? Are you good? Are you okay? And then the responses to that can also just be, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Not really, but yeah, I'm fine. You see, it's like I think we need to infiltrate these masculine spaces first off, because also it's that thing of, like, you feel lost when I say the way you've been taught and brought up in society is completely wrong. Now you've lost all sense of identity, but I'm asking you to ask yourself, what is that identity? Like, take the time to actually sit down with yourself, introspect, and start questioning things. Don't just go with the flow of things, especially when going with the flow of things clearly is not doing you any good at all. Because how did you get to this point, So I think our school used to do this a lot. I thought we were progressive, whatever means being progressive. Like, they still ended up as messed up as the people would talk about in the aloe situations. And after a talk, it's like, I would never be that guy, you are that guy. But having these conversations in a comfortable way, I think also teaching people the language to use in these things, because like, I remember Gabe was saying something about his experience, and like, you didn't necessarily have the words to actually say what that was, and providing people with those tools to engage in conversation and facilitate proper conversation, to go into conversation with understanding and willing to hear very hard takes. Very hard takes. I've heard some crazy takes in my life, but like, I have to meet you where you are. We have to start meeting each other where we are, and then try build from that. I can't just throw you a fucking life jacket. You still don't know how to swim. You're gonna still drown one way or another. But I need to meet you where you are, and we can start building from there. Yeah.
Agree.
Ms. Flatty, I really love the way that you emphasize the power of language. and giving people the language to be able to express their hurt, sort of express the wound that they've had. Yeah, it's very powerful. I've tried to shy away from the term toxic masculinity. I used to love it. I used to throw that word around.
Toxic.
It's toxic. Babes, it's toxic. It's all toxic. What does that mean? Basically, because I think what ends up happening a lot of the time in the conversations around toxic masculinity is that we then start to say that like manliness and masculinity itself is toxic. It's not. What's toxic is, as Michali was alluding to, was your way of dealing with loneliness and hurt and emotion, all of those. That's what's toxic. But masculinity itself isn't inherently wrong. Some of the ways we've seen it be wrong, as Gabe was talking about earlier on, we've seen it like in the gay community where gay people feel the need to overcompensate for like their one flaw in masculinity, which is that they like men. Now to then overcompensate, be real masculine to fix that. So that's where we see like manliness inherently being a problem, but manliness itself is not the issue.
Yeah. It's not like you have to. I appreciate what you said about, even for heterosexual cis men being able to sort of queer up their idea of manliness, and maybe they want to do their eye makeup, or maybe they want to wear earrings, or well, actually all the straight boys are doing that now. But whatever.
That's the male manipulator look, actually.
Ideas of queering up masculinity, and yes, it's really important, I think, for all kinds of different men to be able to do that. But the lumberjacking idea of the masculine man with I don't know, sweat and muscles and macho and stuff, that doesn't have to be a bad thing too. If that guy can heal, because I think all of negative masculinity is largely a trauma response, which you touched on, from like how fathers and uncles and brothers and things have taught you to react to pain in your life, is to close down or to suffer or to be violent and react. And so I think a lot of it is just about healing, about empathy, and about compassion. Alok, all praise Alok, says that so clearly, so often, that if the issue is not about comprehension, it's not about understanding each other, it's just about compassion. If you can have compassion for someone else, you are ultimately having compassion for yourself, because you are recognizing a freedom in them or a pain in them that you can then recognize in yourself and either heal or celebrate. And I think that kind of, if you can find that inside masculinity, then no matter what your masculinity looks like, it's irrelevant. I like that you're rejecting the idea of toxic masculinity, because also to a lot of men, if you say it, they just close down. It's like they aren't able to argue with you anymore because you now said the thing and you accuse them of being that.
You say you are toxic, you don't give them a solution.
Exactly, and they maybe need one. So I do appreciate maybe moving away from that language and finding the language that has compassion for them, but that also holds them accountable to the work that they need to do to heal. Because we as queer people have worked so much to heal just to be able to walk outside, that it's a really necessary thing for, I think, everyone, not just men, everyone, to address their own healing inside within their masculinity and within their femininity. But we're talking about masculinity now, so.
Well, I'm going to talk about femininity. What you've all said made me think of, especially you use the analogy of like, if you're not doing so well, if mental health isn't good, the problem comes in when you push that aside. You're like, I got to toughen up and be a man. And it made me feel, I mean, we all have masculine and feminine energies within us, that like, I mean, not that there's one root cause of this, but like, are we just all super misogynist and can't like even fathom connecting with our feminine energy to so-called like nurture ourselves or take care of ourselves? Are we just living in like a completely misogynist society? I mean,
I think the short answer is yeah.
I feel like a lot of men completely reject the idea of femininity. Like that's as masculinity is right now, it rejects it completely. There are men that despise women, and sometimes it's like, what, who, how, when, where, you know? These are, it's so scary to see sometimes, because as I said, I went to an all-boys school. I've seen a lot, guys. I've seen a lot, and like, how foul and bitter men address the topic of women, first of all, but it's not women per se. It's the traits they start to like talk about, like, women talk about their feelings. Oh no, she's always on me. Like, I'm like, don't you want someone to care? Because you don't. Don't you want someone that has feelings? Because clearly you're trying to reject yours. But it's just always so scary seeing how, I think now if you circle back to like the gay community and that thing of that flaw that you have in your masculinity, the fact that you actually like men, which is now what you see. Oopsie.
Oh no.
That thing of overcompensating to reject femininity again. You're pushing it away. I don't want femmes. Like, it shows that it still just exists wherever. Whenever, wherever.
100%.
Another thing that Mishali was talking about right there at the beginning, the conversation around masculinity, the South African lens on it is inherently unique because of the way that masculinity manifests as violence here. Not just inter-masculine violence, but also your gender-based violence, which means that this conversation or the idea is not just esoteric, it's tangible.
Very.
There are direct negative outcomes that we're seeing in people's lives every day here in South Africa.
100%.
I think, I mean, and everyone's touched on it in different ways, is that what it's coming down to is we have this really problematic societal structure where men are given all of these privileges and advantages just by virtue of being a man. And along with those advantages and privileges, societally come a lot of expectations and a lot of very limiting ideas of how one can express, how one can exist, how one can be of value societally. And then you have a class, and especially younger men now, as you know, we just as generation, the younger generations, we have huge mental health struggles, and you have this problem where your power class, or the men who hold all of this advantage societally and structurally, who now societally their masculinity, and I think as Gabriel, a lot of, and as you said, a lot of men, you mentioned toxic masculinity, just shut down and go on the defensive because they feel like they as a man are being attacked. And you know, we understand that to some degree, yes, but it's not personal, and everyone understands, but a lot of men don't have the language to understand the depth of that. And so you have your class in power who have the power, you know, financially, structurally, physically, in most respects, who have no way of expressing themselves, who more and more have no confidence in their masculinity as what it is and what it's supposed to do and what role they're supposed to play, who also don't have the language to express that to their partners, to their friends, to their communities around them, and who have been taught, you know, largely through their childhood that violence is the answer. And a large part, and particularly in this country, a lot of men take that out on women. Particularly, you have disenfranchised men who don't have jobs. You know, unemployment is a huge issue in this country. And when men don't have jobs, often they feel like they are worth nothing. And I think societally, in a lot of ways, and I think it's easy to say, you know, men, you are worth something, even if you don't have a job, even if you are not the provider. But I think we need to also confront the very real situation that societally and culturally, still, if you are a man and you are unemployed and you don't have a job, you are worthless. And you are not a viable partner. You are not a viable, you know, because the fact is as well that for women, if they're not getting paid as much or they have to look after the children, they can't be the breadwinner. So in a lot of situations, you have to be. And
quite often they're doing all of the above.
yeah, and there's, and that violence gets taken out on women, it gets taken out on children, gets taken out on other men, and it gets taken out on men to themselves, because men feel so pushed into that, eat it, sit with it. And I think you're right, Gina, it's misogyny really backfiring on, and as we've all said, on everyone. It backfires on men hugely. That's why, we're killing ourselves at an unbelievable rate, but also just committing violence and atrocities to everyone around, because there is no way to express it. And I think we've all been in schools or in situations where, the boy in the playground who's the loudest and the most whatever, how often is that the boy whose father never told him he loved him? How often is that the boy whose, mother is always, doesn't have a good relationship with his mother, so will never be able to talk about women because all he sees is his mother and not being loved by his mother. And I think the problem is there's so little language for that the only language becomes one of violence and misogyny, because it's the strong one. It's the alpha, I'm more powerful. And how often the men that project that actually are so broken inside and have no way of expressing that and dealing with that.
And if I may add, it's also that scarcity mentality, right? Of like, well, if I don't feel powerful, I need to make you feel less powerful so that I have a little more. It doesn't work like that. I don't know why. I wish that if people did that kind of, exacted that kind of, scarcity mentality action on someone, they could then realize, oh, wait, I didn't get more power. Or this power that I feel from exacting my power on someone else and making them feel little isn't actually real power. And I think there's like a disconnect there where it's like people think that that's giving them more power, but it doesn't. And I don't know how to get people to see that it's not power to make someone else smaller or hurt. But I do think it's, as you say, it's men feeling disenfranchised and going, well, if I feel this low, in order to feel higher, I need to stand on you. It's really messed up.
I think also in terms of the South African context, because we're such, not rainbow nations, not the right word, I use that as a joke, but it's like it's so intersectional, because as I'm speaking about language, I don't only mean like the words we're using now, I mean like quite literally all the different languages, different cultures. There's certain things you have to go through as a man. When you're closer, you have to go to the mountain, be in isolation. I don't know everything that goes on there. I haven't been yet, so wish me luck. But it's just like the conversations being had and what that means to each different culture. Like that's the thing. There's so much that goes into like, yes, being the man that's meant to lead and head, but in some cultures you may see that they are made to respect women more, but I don't know, it's such a big melting pot, so it's hard to like start and pinpoint one place, because these conversations can't only just be had with us, it needs to be had with everyone. And in a way we can, as I said before, it's like meeting them where they are, because it must be hard to tell someone your traditions, the way you work is wrong. You see, like you can imagine that it literally, you don't know what to do with yourself. And when we get angry, it's either fight or flight. And what most men do is fight. You see, because of then that expectation to be a man that must stand his ground. It's like, no one was trying to fight you.
Yeah, but I think telling someone, hang on, you're like the way you conduct yourself is wrong. Coming back to their sort of insecurity about their worth, that I think that does trigger them and make them like, you can't tell me I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong about this thing, then I'm wrong about everything, and then my whole life has been meaningless. And exactly. So I think you're so right. That's such a trigger, and meeting them where they are, pulling them to the accountability without frightening them away or making them fight you.
Yes,
it's quite difficult.
It's quite difficult.
Yeah.
You know,
You've got to really go in very softly and
Fragile masculinity.
just fragile masculinity. That's
say,
something
like-
that I think we've been dancing around
Yeah.
the whole conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think to round things up, check me on time. How long have we been recording? Okay. Well, do you want to take a break, or should we? I feel like we should. It's been nice.
Come, power through.
It's this one's been very nice and coherent. We've been talking about these these different descriptors for masculinity, and I think we've all struggled with positive masculinity, and we all went, well, how do we wear what, huh?
I'm sorry.
But toxic and fragile came up very quickly, and we all understood exactly what we were talking about there. What do you think is something that you really appreciate in other men in their masculinity that doesn't get talked about enough, or that you value in your male friends or your male friendships, or sorry, not male, friendships with men, and what those look like? What do you think men don't get given enough credit for in the way that they do conduct themselves? Because I think that goes back to how do we address the toxic conversation, and it's not just saying, oh, you're bad, everything you do is wrong, because I think it does you just go defensive, and it's everything I know. What do you mean it's wrong? I think and I think that's what so many men, as soon as the conversation comes up, that's exactly how they feel. And I think we need to be offering solutions and saying, listen, we understand this is not your fault. It's probably your fathers and their fathers and your uncles and, society. And this is what we love about what is your masculinity and what is inherently masculine about you. And here's how you can turn that into a more real sense of power.
But don't you think that's quite interesting? Sorry, I was just thinking about how we're addressing the topic of masculinity is from a very feminine point of view. Like actually asking you, how do you feel about that? How did that make you feel? Let's look at that. Okay, I understand you, but how about this? And it's just that
It's
thing.
so careful as well.
It's hard to meet them there because you're rejecting femininity.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you asking me that? I'm good. Can't you see? I'm thriving. Okay.
At the same time, this is actually almost my answer to the question. This is a very masculine trait to be extremely solutions orientated.
Exactly.
Brad really said, "There's a problem. I'm gonna fix it. So I'm gonna do something."
Yeah.
That is sometimes I see you alluded to it earlier on as well. That you as a masculine trait is to go, cool. There's a problem. I'm gonna see what I can do about it. It's also then related to our chat around toxic masculinity being that we're not giving a solution. We're not being solutions orientated about it. Men on the whole want to be solutions orientated about it. It's often where a lot of conflict comes in with my women friends, where they are in the ranting phase. I'm solutions orientated. I'm like, okay, we're crying. We are done crying. We are fixing this problem.
We know the problem. Let's
They are
deal
not
with
done.
it.
They're not done crying. They're not done crying. I don't think I had an end to that sentence, but I think
Get you. I don't know. Let me come back to the question, because I have so many thoughts going every time either of you speak, and all of you speak, because I have so many things I want to add. But I'm trying to come back to the question. Basically, I think that, and it's weird when you asked first, what is sort of a thing about masculinity that you want to celebrate. The thing I don't actually want to celebrate, but there's a version of the thing that I think they could flip that could be really cool. I've noticed, especially since feeling like, air quotes, one of the guys, like being recognized by men as a man, which has only happened for me in the past year, maybe year and a half. I've noticed like a camaraderie, and even when I hear talk in like the locker rooms and stuff, and when it's not misogynist, which is most of the time, it's quite often very like bro, look after it, bro. And I'm talking very much about like cishet masculinity that I'm witnessing as someone who can kind of get by in the world going like, ooh, they don't know that I'm like a spy.
Spy.
But some kind of
Imposter.
exactly. I feel like such an imposter, but I love watching it. And I see that there's this kind of camaraderie and this kind of like us over everyone else, like we'll look after each other, bro, kind of thing. And I feel like if they realize that that's actually just holding space and community, they could make that a really beautiful, very emotional, very nurturing space for going like, hey, I will look out for you and I will love you. And how can I love you better? I don't think they get that far in it, but like the groundwork is there. Dudes will look out for each other over someone else, hurt other people to look out for each other and to like lift each other up, unless they're obviously the dudes who are putting another dude down. But I've seen a camaraderie that I think could be very well used as like community and space holding. I haven't yet seen it used in that way that productively, personally, but I do think it is something that we as men lol, could really capitalize on in this kind of search for finding a positive masculinity and for finding a way to heal out of this need to be violent and to put others down.
I was going to say the camaraderie thing, the community thing is definitely a big thing.
Sports, wow.
Back to the boys' school thing. So it's just like for my school's motto, it's one and all in one, something like that. But it's just like once my school's saints, once a saint's brother, always a saint's brother, right? And it's actually insane to see how I cannot speak to someone for years. I mean, a decade can go by. And they'll be like, didn't you? Yeah, I went, hi, how you been? It's that sense of community that's actually so insanely beautifully, like it's beautiful to see, because there's so many things that are just passing in this life, things that don't remain constant, things you're always questioning. But like with these things, I feel like there's no love lost, actually. I've been fortunate enough to make a few friends and to meet people that I will always be connected to simply because we were brothers, you know, things like that. Like, it's just like what happens in those spaces, what happens when the brothers are speaking, how we use that to mostly and always our disadvantage, not really lifting each other up. Locker room talk, insane. Or all of us picking on each other, crazy stuff. But that sense of community, and I think like some sort of resilience, like let me say this, in a way of not saying being feminine doesn't mean being resilient, but I feel like back to what I was saying with energies and things like that, it's just to that forward, like you have to look forward.
Perseverance.
Only, yes, like logical perseverance, definitely, like it's forward looking. You can't actually be stuck on the past at all, you know, which is something that I admire. But it's like, don't overdo it. Like, it's okay. You actually went through a very traumatic experience. Think about it, process it, so it doesn't affect you in this future that you keep on looking forward to, you know?
Yeah.
I think what's been really interesting in talking about a lot of these things is we've all touched on things where we've gone, you know, this is great up to a certain point, and then homies always take it way too far.
What you're trying to do.
And I think, again, it's the solution orientation, and it's guys will do things and then go, okay, this seems to work. This seems to validate my masculinity, and this seems to validate my need to feel accepted and like I have some sort of control and value. So I'm going to keep bloody doing this because I've found a solution. So fucking pedal to the metal. Here we go. And, you know, then you have a problem of a whole bunch of men who don't, again, really have the language to explain why they're doing that. So everyone kind of thinks, well, we're all doing it and it seems to kind of be working. So again, like we're all in this together. Let's get in. And I think, I mean, the thing that I was going to touch on is I think brotherhood and, you know, that sense of community and belonging is something that I've always found beautiful about my male or my relationships with other men, and even in, you know, sporting environments. And I think you said it perfectly, is like the foundation is so there. Men understand the bro code instantaneously. I mean, we all understand a lot of it's fucked up and it's stupid.
But the foundation, the network is
the
there.
groundwork of, hey,
It
like,
functions.
hold one another up, support one another. You know, like when one of you stumbles, you pull them back up. You don't let someone get in the way of you and your friends. And I think, you know, I'm lucky to have a group of friends who are men who are my best friends, and we love to like bro down together and you know, do things that are really traditionally masculine things, but at the same time we've managed to find a way to have conversations that have meaning, and we do check in with one another, and we do, you know, like call each other and it's like, hey, how are you doing? No, like, actually, how are you doing? Slow down. We all know you're gonna say I'm fine. We're all gonna say I'm fine the first time, but you know, what's the second step? And I think to the point of those spaces being spaces for incredible change potentially, one of my favorite experiences of masculinity and men in a group was my matric water polo year. And there were 4 of us in matric who had played together for 5 years. And, you know, water polo, first team water polo is this traditionally very, you know, hyper testosterone. It's just like aggressive. It's physical. And I loved that because I loved doing that, and I loved getting in the pool and having a bit of a roll. And there was something I really enjoyed about that. But so much of it was I was doing it with my team, and we got into matric, and as juniors we'd had negative experiences with coaches and senior players and how they talked about us and women and whatever. And we decided as a matric year, like, we're not, like, our locker room, we're not having locker room talk. And we made it very clear to the juniors, and like, we can talk about girls and we can talk about relationships and we can talk about sex. That's all important. Let's do that. But you will not in this locker room speak, you know, badly of women. And by having space where the matrics, quite early on, something happened and we were all crying with one another. And what we experienced over that year, especially for the younger boys, was over that year they came to a space where the way we would talk with one another was so much more open, and we could talk about things that really mattered and things that really broke people's hearts. And, you know, we had a space where we could bro down together and be in a very masculine, you know, competition-fueled, performance-based environment, but within a space where it was like, we're in this together, and it's important that our togetherness is real, and we can talk about things beyond the sports and the competition and the surface level stuff about girls. And it was such an evolution for my understanding of masculinity, seeing how the younger guys understood it and changed and grew, and how we grew within that. And I think, as you said, there's so many things that are inherently masculine that are beautiful and completely necessary and critical to us being able to move forward as a society. It's a very forward-moving energy, but as I think we've all touched on, it's the direction and the context in which that's being done, which at the moment, you know, the disenfranchisement and lack of understanding means that we want to head in one direction, but we've been told the one direction we were going is very wrong. And where's this other direction? Where are we supposed to go? And I think the stagnation and not knowing where to direct that energy is, again, a huge root of why we're internalizing all of that. And we've talked ad nauseum about the hugely detrimental effects on that. Please add something.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you for having the conversation, because I think the conversation is really important, and it is one of like healing and of empathy. But I don't know how we can encourage society to have these conversations that are not in silo and you know, like that are not separate to each other, that we don't have like men having a conversation around masculinity, and then we have queer conversations around, you know, queer issues, and then we have conversations with women around victimhood and around experiences of being women and trying to survive and holding shit together in society. But if we could somehow, within schools, intergenerational, with older, our grandparents and our parents and aunties and uncles and ourselves, to have conversations so that we could understand each other's experiences and empathize with each other and see how we can help each other. Like, what do you need as men in society to make you feel heard and looked after and important? And what do women need from men? And what do men need from women? And what does queer community need to feel protected and affirmed and important and valued? Because I think all of us are victims of what society has taught us, what the binaries are supposed to look like. And that is something that's, I think, all that pressure has made downfalls for all of us, because I think everyone has suffered because we've been told what masculine looks like and must perform like, and what feminine looks like and must perform like. And then we're just trying to uphold these really weird, just binaries that have really been oppressive to everyone as society. So I think this conversation is really beautiful, and I want it to go into spaces with everyone. Yeah.
I'm glad that you said that, because I do find that the spaces where I speak about it the most and I'm most comfortable speaking about it are obviously in my queer circles and partner relationships and close friends. But I've recently had to speak with it with my father, because I've been working with him on stuff, and his relationship with his father, my relationship with him as someone that he brought up as, in his eyes, his baby girl, and then learning my masculinity and learning, like, well, can I still kiss you, and can I still hug you, and, you know, can I still do the things that I did when you were perceived as a woman? Or now that you're masculine, am I not allowed to do that? Even with my mom, you know, she has always called me her angel, even as like through my 20s. But then when she started to see that I was sort of so-called masculinizing, she asked me, like, can I still call you that? Or does it, you know, make you less feel like I'm not seeing you? There's so many conversations that we can have intergenerationally that are so interesting and that can be so helpful, that especially because also our elders still do have a lot of, not to call my parents elders, but previous generations still do have a lot of influence in their own way, in a different way to us as younger people. And I think that seeing them all have the conversation with each other, my parents conversing with their friends about something like my masculinity, yeah, sure, maybe I don't want to be there for that chat, but I do think that maybe it leads to them looking at how they talk to their kids, and also how they talk to each other, and also how they are in relationship to each other, especially older couples, especially older straight couples. I think they have things to learn from us and the freedom that we have found in our generation, and we have things to learn from them. And that conversation, as you just brought up, is so, I think, so needs to be a part of the progression in this issue. It can't just be in silo, as you said.
Yeah, I also want to touch on, I think, how important it is that we do have these conversations, not in, you know, in isolation, in silos of men having the conversation, because although, let's please encourage the men to have the conversation as much as humanly possible, because we're just so far behind that we've got a lot of catching up to do. But, you know, and it's really important that men do have these conversations amongst themselves in spaces where they feel comfortable to say things. And I think in much the same way that there's certain conversations that women won't feel comfortable having in the presence of men, I think, you know, the same is true. But, you know, as you pointed out, I think misogyny, the patriarchy, and what we're realizing is, like, it's impacted everyone really badly, you know, and it impacts men in a very different way to the way it impacts women, but it's impacted us all badly, and everyone will benefit from everyone will benefit in general from everyone feeling more able to express themselves and have the language. But I think with this issue in the eye, everyone benefits from men feeling like there's a space they can express themselves and feel valued and feel loved and feel that it's okay to express themselves the way that they want to. Everyone benefits from that. And there's so much space for men to step up and step into positions of real power and influence and support where it's going. Your real role is, I think you touched on it, where it's like oh, I don't feel like I have enough power, so I've got to stand on someone else so that I feel a little bit more powerful. And it's this temporary little like hit of, okay, I've got it. But I think, as you said, it's so temporary and it's not real. Real power, and I think what we need to be encouraging everyone, but particularly men, to do is like step into your power and support women, trans bodies, femme bodies, people who don't have as much of that power. Step into your power, step into that privilege that you have as a man, and exert your strength outwardly, but in a way that's saying, hey, I'm strong enough to not feel threatened by a man in eyeshadow. Things like that, where it's going, hey, it's a man in eyeshadow. If you have an issue with that, we're going to have a problem. And starting to convert that strength and the indignance and the power to saying, guys, there's a space for that, and you can actually do some really good shit. And women and queer bodies have been really asking for a lot of support from particularly the more, but from that masculine space.
And
step
men,
into
other
it.
men
Yeah,
also.
other men, we need that.
Need you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, and I think that's what we've got to be doing more of.
So I have a little brother, right? So I kind of like watch how he also kind of navigates growing up and masculinity, and how he's uncomfortable talking about his feelings. And I try to be aware as much as possible and kind of like teach him like, hey, it's okay to like what you like. It's okay to like different colors. It's okay to do certain things. It doesn't make you less boyish, because I can see how he kind of is affected with the bullying, the bullying between men. It's a huge thing I've seen. And yeah, like I mean, I've tried to tell him like it's okay if you like boys, if you like girls, like it's totally okay. But I can see the comfort in him, that discomfort, And when I think about that, I just kind of like, I wanted to ask, especially with you guys, with how you identify. Like with identity, is it really inherent, or is it like something that just kind of like continues to, it's almost like a relationship throughout your life? Because I mean, especially with me, like I feel like I'm fluid. I like what I like. It doesn't matter. I don't really care. Like it's probably gonna change, probably not. Doesn't matter. But like I see with the queer community, I feel like, especially with like from millennial ages to Gen Z, just like you guys love to like label things. And like, what if today you decide, okay, I'm gay, and then tomorrow you're like, okay, I think I'm like kind of bisexual, or like, or I'm asexual, whatever. Like, why do you always have to label it?
Ooh. Go ahead.
And, yeah, but like, yeah, just onto that, and like with like identity, like, is it like inherent, or do you just like wake up one day, like from your young age, and does it have to be a thing? Are you okay with it changing? Yeah.
So the way that Gabe and I first met at a ballroom scene. So ballroom in the queer community is when essentially there are several categories and you perform or display yourself in relation to those categories. And it relates to RuPaul, like the drag queen, is often quoted as saying, "We're all born naked and the rest is drag." It relates to this extremely self-righteous, pretentious author called Judith Butler, who coined the term gender performativism. And it's basically saying, so all of those kind of say that identity is not what we are, but is what we do. So a lot of the ways that we then end up dealing with identity or feeling identity is related to how we interact with people, how we interact with society, and how that society interacts with us. And that's why I think fluidity, that's sort of the origins of fluidity actually, is that it isn't necessarily an inherent attribute. It's a performance or a doing. That doesn't make it any less real. It doesn't make it any less important to the individual, but it is still an action more than it is an attribute.
On the labels thing, I think the labels are only useful as you make them. For me, the labels, and I have been very fluid. I have identified as so many different things, and I have found community in those places in my life. The labels have helped me find people like me. So realizing that the word for what I was trans was a major breakthrough for me, because then I could go, okay, let me look at what other trans people are doing, because I'm freaking out and I don't know how to do this, or what part of it applies to me, or what feels right or what feels wrong. And then I got to go look at a whole lot of other trans people and go, okay, I think I'm a trans man. Oh, maybe I'm trans masc. Oh, maybe I'm non-binary. Like I use these labels to find community and to find understanding. That is where the label ends for me. If it no longer serves me in terms of community and understanding and growth for myself, then I will happily leave that label behind. I consider myself fluid in both gender and sexuality. Some days I feel really strange calling myself a man or even a trans man, and I lean more towards saying I'm trans masc, or I just say I'm non-binary. I can feel different this morning to this afternoon. And I really value fluidity, and I wish that we would all be free enough to just listen to ourselves and nothing else and go like, this is who I am right now, and I do not owe that to you tomorrow. That's completely fine, and actually a beautiful part of queerness, I think. I do see how the labels sometimes get us bogged down, and I would just encourage anyone who feels bogged down by the labels to use them only insofar as they are useful to you. For positive things. If you start to feel trapped by them, let go of them. They are just words. Language is so important and completely unimportant at the same time.
I think from what you said, like maybe from a queer perspective, it's like they're just labels and we're choosing what we want to do. But from a different lens, I don't know, maybe that's hetero. It's like, oh my God, all these labels. But let's maybe relate back to masculinity in the fact that fluidity can exist. You in yourself can adopt that fluidity. The fact that you can choose what you want to choose this day, you can be who you want to be this day, you can choose your own path, your own personality, do what you want to do, identify as you want to identify. Applying that in the way you also navigate masculinity, I think would be very beautiful. As in the beginning I was saying, like masculinity starts to become this one lane that you're going to, that you no longer can go this way or that way and still, like your brother can be boyish. You can still be boyish and like pink. Like it's not that deep, but it's the fact that you have that you're able to be fluid in your own masculinity and comfortable enough to do what you want to do, and no one can take that away from you because it's literally your own thing. It's your identity. It's what you choose to do. No one can take that away from you except yourself. You know.
Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
I think on that note, I want to wrap things up and just get some closing thoughts from each of you. Around, I think we've touched on so many important things. I think the community and the brotherhood that men, I think, feel inherently very drawn to. And I think particularly for men, I think that's one thing that with certain labels is really attractive. It's this inherent need to feel belonging and to feel a part of something. And I think that's why a lot of men will grab a label and cling on to it for dear life, because it becomes so much of their value.
Liverpool, for example.
Yeah,
Like that's
as a lifelong Liverpool fan, but it is a thing. And at the same time, I think there's so much beauty in the silliness of sports camaraderie, you know, and the fact that you can walk into a sports bar, and I'm a Liverpool fan, and there's a Liverpool game on, and I instantly feel the sense of immense camaraderie and fun and love and community, and just around something so silly as a sports team. and again, it goes to, you know, the groundwork is really there. The systems all exist. We've just bastardized them. And what I'd like to get each of you to end off on is, what encouragement do you have to men who are feeling disenfranchised, who are feeling like they don't belong anywhere, who are feeling that their masculinity doesn't have a valid place in the world, or their expression doesn't fit what they are expected to meet? What is your encouragement to them in the spirit of brotherhood?
I would say breathe, drink a glass of water, listen, and I mean really listen before you react. Don't come up with your answer while someone's busy telling you how you can love them better and be more compassionate and empathetic. Just listen. We don't need you to come up with a solution. I think that thing that we've touched on here, it is a beautiful part of maybe a masculinity, and I think there's a lot of solution finding in femininity as well that we haven't spoken about. But I think a lot of the problem comes from a reactive, defensive need to stand my ground and show my worth. I promise you are worthy just by virtue of being a human. We are beautiful and messy and problematic and stunning, and you can just breathe, drink water, and listen for now. And I think the rest will come.
I think with that whole thing of having community and brotherhood, start talking to your friends. Start just saying things, like not knowing how to be honest with the fact that you don't know what's going on. You don't know how you're feeling. Be honest with yourself. Like, firstly, before you have to admit this to anyone or admit it to this person, be honest with yourself. Find comfort in that honesty, and then you can branch out in that honesty, you know? Like, we don't have the solutions, and maybe the fact is, in fact, it's like getting to that solution. That's you finding your solution, getting all these different answers so you can get the best solution for yourself in the end is what you should do. You should surrender to the process. You know, we're ever changing, you know, we're all adapting. Humans just, one day you feel this way, one day you feel another, you know. Don't pressure yourself to figure it out in one day, because no one's ever figured out anything in one day, really. So be gentle, be compassionate with yourself. Sometimes I feel like everyone has that voice, inner child, whatever you may call it, of how you would really want someone to talk to you in this moment. Like, with your problem, I wish someone would just tell me this, or I wish, start doing that to yourself. Start speaking to yourself in that way. Take care of yourself, you know? And then with that, you actually begin to facilitate conversation and like, you know, I've actually told myself how to do this. Then another man that you're speaking to might be like, oh, actually, I haven't tried that. Let me try this. Or actually, I've been feeling the same way, you know? These things are as simple as just actually starting the conversation, being brave enough and courageous enough to have the conversation.
Yeah, I think that you can never underestimate the power of a conversation. So look around at the people who are in your life and who matter to you, not just your male friends, but your women friends, your family, your chosen family, and try and talk to them and have that opportunity. But I also think back on some of those events that Gabe and I have been at, where when you see a masculine category and you see people walking and performing their masculinity and feeling pride in that, and feeling strength in their masculinity, and sort of parading that and showing that to people. It's a beautiful thing to see people being proud of their masculine side, the masculine energy in them, or like their male identity. So hold on to that.
On that note, I just want to thank you all for sharing so honestly and vulnerably with us, and just to emphasize that the strength and the bravery, as Gabriel said, you know, the strength and the bravery and the courage is really in actually having difficult conversations with yourself. being the one who stands up for the little guy, not the one who, continues to belittle him. There's so much strength and value, and we've touched on so much of it in so many different expressions of masculinity. And I think ultimately what we've come down to is there's so much that's beautiful and to be celebrated about masculinity and about men. I think we need to be looking into ourselves and trying to find that, and we need to be looking at one another and showing that to one another, and having the strength and the bravery to tell another man he looks good. It's not, it's okay, to support one another, to cry with one another. That's strength, that's bravery, that's courage. With the state of the world as it is in today's day and age, that's the bravest, strongest thing. I think it's one of my favorite tropes, is just a huge, traditionally masculine, scary-looking man who has, is this heart of gold, absolute teddy bear that would never hurt a fly except someone who hurt someone who, didn't deserve it. And there's so much power and strength and value in being all of those things that are so masculine and having the capacity to control it and deploy it for the good of those around you. And I think that's what the world needs is more men who are harnessing that power to help those around them and have conversations that bridge those gaps. And yeah, thank you for helping to do that. And I really hope that those who listen and watch this have learned something, have thought something that you maybe wouldn't have thought before, heard an opinion that you wouldn't have before. And as Gabe said, just listen before forming that.
Or watch the lesbians. Not everyone, but a lot of lesbians, a lot of the studs are waxing the whole positive masculine.
There we go.
Look there for inspiration, because it's happening there. I'm not saying it's flawless, but it's there.
It's never going to be flawless. We're not flawless as human beings.
Just try it.
Talk to your bros, because everyone's broken inside, and I think it's a very real truth.
Yeah.
And not enough, everyone will actually probably feel a lot better if you're the one to break the ice and start the conversation.
Yeah.
It'll probably improve your relationship with your friends 1,000,000 times. In fact, can guarantee it. Thank you so much for joining us on the second installment of Yours Queerly. It's been really special. And I'm really excited for where we can push the conversation going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know. That's a. I won't lie to you. These chairs.
Are there?
I was sitting on it as well.
Was my chair just okay?
Wait for the mic right there.